Look, it's Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret! Go get him, champ.
He's got to be the happiest man in the World Wrestling Federation right now. Jimmy Hart, come on in. And from Reno, Nevada, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, the former football great from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Bret the Hitman Hart are the tag team champions of the world.
You know, the paper said, everybody says, the greatest team in the history of professional wrestling today. I guess you can say we are the in crowd. Am I right, Anvil?
What about it, Jim Neidhart?
You know what's wrong with the Killer Bees? Why do the Killer Bees have to cheat and use their masks? Why do the Islanders have to come to the ring in dresses? Why do the Demolition have to wear spikes? Why are the Rougeos just so unpopular? Because as our man said it, they just aren't in with the in crowd.
We're the in crowd.
Is that right, Bret Hart?
Wouldn't you think so?
You're the tag team champions of the world.
If we let you inside the Hart Foundation, Bill, and we let you come to the parties with the Hart Foundation, you'd want to come, right?
I've been inside the Hart Foundation.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd like to stay. You'd like to stay with the in-crowd.
You've got a few different people up there, I'd say that.
Yeah, we have a lot of different people, but the point is, the in-crowd is on a roll. The Hart Foundation is on a roll, and we keep rolling and rolling and rolling over all these tag teams, Gene. There's none left. They're dropping like flies around here.
Tonight, excellence of execution versus the greatest intercontinental champion of all time.
This is the moment I've been waiting for as I've fought and crawled my way to the top. The next World Wrestling Federation Intercontinental Champion right here.
Bell's gone, this one's underway. All the marbles at stake here. Everybody here is thinking pink. Both guys taking a lot of liberties here in this one. They know how much is at stake.
They're not laying back.
Hitman wide open on the apron. Right into the steel barricade.
Perfect will be in the showers in 10 minutes.
He's got him set up for it. Oh, no, no! No, he got down. I can't believe it.
Nobody's ever kicked out of that. I have never seen a match go one way, then the other, back and forth so many times.
Oh, look at this. He's got it halfway on. The coach is up on the apron. And there goes the coach. Oh. Nice block there, that move. Beautiful counter. The sharpshooter. He's got it. He's got it. No. We got a new champion. No. Tears in the eyes of Mama Dad Hart. The new Intercontinental Champion, Bret the Hitman Hart. And he deserves it. This place is going bananas.
Bret Hart's got the sharpshooter on Yokozuna. Mr. Fuji, Fuji, what's he doing?
Oh, man.
He threw something right in his eyes. Yokozuna hooks the leg.
We got a new champion.
Yokozuna's won the title.
Yokozuna's done it!
This 568-pound champion, Yokozuna, unquestionably is a monster.
The most powerful, the most intimidating, the most dominant force that's ever existed in wrestling history. The great, mighty Yokozuna.
WrestleMania 10 stands to be one of the greatest challenges of my entire career. Because I was robbed of the World Wrestling Federation title 1 year from WrestleMania. I got what it takes to get past Yokozuna. I'm going to fight fire with fire. You are just another opponent, and I will wipe you out. You're looking at the World Wrestling Federation champion.
All right, here we go. Our final match, the Hitman Bret Hart, and of course, Yokozuna.
Bret Hart, you're going to have to deal with the fact that it's no longer a matter of you trying to win the title. It's a matter of you trying to keep yourself in one piece. He's going to chew you up and spit you out, Hart, and your career may be over at the biggest WrestleMania of all time. I can't wait to see it happen.
Yokozuna going out.
This is it.
The Hitman Bret Hart is not moving.
Wait a minute, he's losing his balance. He just lost his balance on the rope. What? He hit his head. 1, 2, 3. No! No! We have a new champion. No way! Bret Hart somehow has done it. He is the new World Wrestling Federation champion. Unquestionably, fate on the side of Bret the Hitman Hart, who has done the impossible.
This says it all. This says that I am everything I said I am. The best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. The excellence of execution.
Stepping through. Top tier. Turn on. Austin can't reach the rope. And who would put? He took his body. See the blood squirting. Awesome. Trying to come out of that. Impossible. He's not for sure he broke it now. I can't understand. Steve Austin. Austin coming out. And Bret, I can tell you, I've never unconscious and quite frankly needs medical. Boy, this is going to be a tough sickening over this thing. Come on. Austin came. Oh, just waist lock. Bret Hart right to the canvas. Steve Austin is trying to come around. Austin. And Austin will need help back into the hall. No. 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 He's going to walk out of here on his own. Whether Vince McMahon is going to try to talk to a very, obviously,
Bret Hart.
disconsolate Bret Hart.
You've got to be terribly frustrated. Extremely frustrated over what has just happened.
Whoa!
Frustrated isn't the goddamn word for it. This is bullshit.
Oh, we apologize, ladies and
Screw
gentlemen.
me. Everybody screws me, and nobody does a goddamn thing about it. Nobody in the building cares. Nobody in the dressing room cares. So much goddamn injustice around here. I've had it up to here.
We apologize, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody knows it. I know it. Everybody knows it. I should be the World Wrestling Federation champion.
Get him out of the ring.
Everybody just keeps turning a blind eye. You keep turning a blind eye to it. I got that Gorilla Monsoon. He turns a blind eye to it. Everybody in that goddamn dressing room knows that I'm the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be.
Cut him off.
If you don't like it, tough shit.
We wrestled in, I was in State College, Pennsylvania, and I think Sean came up to me and was excited to hear that we were working together. And I don't think the news had broke yet that Kevin and Razor are actually skipping off to WCW, which was going to throw a monkey wrench into a lot of things. But I remember Sean had come up to me, he says, he was talking about when he got the title, that he was going to work with Hunter, he was going to work with Razor, and he thought he could maybe get some more matches out of Diesel. I think the last one he said, I think I could even probably work a program with the Kid. And that was, for me, was a bit of a flag went off, and I said, he's going to work with all his friends. You know, that didn't sit well with me, that he was basically going to make money and position all his friends to kind of get in on the money while the rest of us to watch him and his friends score the money. And that was the first time I said, I don't know if this guy's the right guy, doesn't have the right mindset to be the champion. And maybe that's where they started the sort of underlying tension.
The rivalry between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. As a fan watching this, I had no idea what was going on as it was happening.
Look at this! Oh, you're kidding me. Michaels, are you going to try to beat Bret Hart with a sharpshooter? Yes, he is!
Watching it go down, as a fan, it kind of blended the lines of reality and who was the winner, and everyone was confused.
Are you kidding me?
And I remember watching this personally saying, I don't think I saw him taps.
I was as shocked as Bret the Hitman Hart was, but I was not quite as upset.
Then as things unfolded and history was made, we find out he didn't taps.
What happened? What happened? Bret Hart gave up on the sharpshooter.
You saw Bret Hart go to town. He destroyed the set. He was spitting in the air. He was writing WCW, and you knew something big was going on.
Wow, you talk about controversy. This crowd is living.
I would have done whatever I had to do, so I can't go on either side of that. I take care of myself, and that's all there is to it.
The Montreal screw job really made me hate Vince McMahon because I loved Bret Hart, and just the idea that Bret got screwed and that Vince was the one who did it, and it just made me think, oh gosh, this guy's such a I would never want to work for this guy.
Michaels with a sharpshooter has become champion, and Bret Hart is standing in disbelief.
I never thought I'd see Bret Hart in another WWE ring ever again.
Ladies and gentlemen, good night from Montreal.
I look at it from the standpoint of the referee did not screw Bret Hart. Shawn Michaels certainly did not screw Bret Hart. Nor did Vince McMahon screw Bret Hart. I truly believe that Bret Hart screwed Bret Hart. And he can look in the mirror and know that.
The Monday Night Wars would ensue, and you would go down to WCW, and they didn't know what the hell to do with you. You're a worker's worker, and you belong on top of the card and in the mix. But they weren't ready for you.
You know who told me that before I ever went? You.
Oh, did I?
I remember you talking to me and said, they don't know what the hell they're doing down there. And guys that had been there, including Kevin Nash and different guys that had been there before, said, don't ever go there. They're a bunch of dumbest idiots in the world. There was so much talent that I could have worked with. Booker T, Hogan. I should have worked with Hogan right away. I should have had Hulk Hogan and a sharpshooter and done some big numbers with him. And then it was red hot. I went into WCW. I had more heat. I had wrestled you at WrestleMania 13. I beat Undertaker at SummerSlam. I knocked Vince out. I didn't really lose to Shawn. I had so much heat, and they just didn't know what the hell to do with me. I want to thank everybody for all the great memories. Wembley Stadium, all my fans in England. That was my favorite match that I ever had, and I'm happy to tell you that. And I wouldn't change that minute, that moment for anything. And I guess I'm going to wrap up here, but I just want to say that for the wrestlers and everybody and everyone around the world, if I could give one message to them, it would be that the best chance you have if you want to rise to the top is to give yourself up to loneliness, fear nothing, and work hard. One thing you'll discover is that life is based less than you think on what you've learned, and much more than you think on what you have inside you right from the beginning. And I'm happy to say that you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm good. I'm happy to be alive. I'm glad to be here. And I thank every one of you for coming out here tonight. Thank you very much.
You know, Andy, nothing helps a nation, nothing helps a world in need like a podcast about the Hitman Bret Hart. Broadcasting from unknown locations, it is America's #1 bi-coastal podcast featuring two annoying Jews. We are Nothing Worthwhile. On the West Coast, it is your host and moderator, Evan Moody. And on the East Coast, in an unknown location in the airlock, it is Andrew Groo. How are you? How are you holding up?
All work and no play makes Andy a dull boy. Come here, Evan.
This seems to be Andy's only outlet with the real world right now.
You're actually right. I'm surrounded by, wall number 1, wall number 2, wall number 3, wall number 4, and all the demons from my past.
What turned out to be a dream, staying home with very little consequences, seems to be a nightmare?
Exactly. I mean, this is like, I was thinking about it the other day. This is remarkably like my life, except now I don't have a choice, Like, this is what I do. This is what I look forward to. And now I'm going batshit.
Yeah, now you have to make sure you're 6 feet away from the next person at Publix.
Well, that's easy. that's the easy part, But yeah, it's look, this is new territory for all of us. We're every hour is a new thing. So in my state right now, it's not obviously like it is in New York or California or whatever, but I'm assuming that it will be. So we're inside, we're on lockdown, and here we are.
Yeah, well, my state, Arizona, as well, it's not like New York, but the Department of Health Services raised the community spread level to widespread. So we're feeling it here. Most businesses, all school districts, everybody's on lockdown, quarantine. So, we understand what's going on in the nation and the world, but we are here to talk about stuff that we enjoy talking about. Pandemic, schmandemic. Let's get to it, Groo. Before we tackle today's topic of the Hitman, Bret Hart, let's scale back to our last discussion. It was our top 5 sports movie podcasts. Groo, my friend, we discussed what makes up a sports movie, why do we love them so much, and why do the critics typically take a pass on sports movies, and we both gave our top 5 lists, and of course that opened the proverbial floodgates of tepid criticism. Groo, thoughts on top 5 sports movies?
I stand by mine. The big piece of criticism that we've gotten is, well, it's actually there's one in my favor and one in yours. That Rocky is a sports movie. I still don't think it is, but the general thinking there is that it is. And some people believe that you're a little off on Jerry Maguire. They don't consider Jerry Maguire to be a sports movie. And I agree with that. But
yet AFI, I found out this morning, and I'm telling you how I found out. I watched Miracle. I did not get a chance to see Seabus. Give you my Miracle review in a little bit. But Miracle, they do reference AFI. So I said, let me actually go on. I clicked on a link, and they have a whole bunch of different lists. So I went on sports movies, and there, behold, Jerry Maguire is listed as the number 10 all-time sports movie by the American Film Institute. Yes, by the American Film Institute. So, nanny, poo-poo to everybody else. And I really didn't know that till this morning.
Wow. I mean, if they're considering Rocky a sports movie, I hope Rocky was before number 2. What was number 1?
Raging Bull.
Interesting
now,
that 2 boxing movies are 1 and 2.
Now, you asked me. I enjoyed Raging Bull, but no, compared to Rocky, not even close.
No, but it's Raging Bull. Raging Bull is an incredible movie with one of the great performances of all time, but it's not Rocky.
But we love that.
Yeah, it's just Rocky is just look what Rocky did in and of itself and what it spawned. There's no comparison. Sorry.
Well, here's what I want to say about this, Groo. First of all, let me go back to it. So you got some criticism, and I got. What was the other piece of criticism that you wanted to state? So
it was that
Jerry Maguire.
Yeah, it was for Rocky for me and Jerry Maguire for you.
Okay, so let me go over a couple of things that your brother specifically mentioned in criticism. All right, hold on. So he talked about us mentioning, or me mentioning, Bruce Springsteen twice. Now, without overtly naming the songs, we know that Secret Garden was on the Jerry Maguire soundtrack, and we know that The Wrestler was on the Wrestler soundtrack. So, I mean, okay, right there. He also made a note that we mentioned porn twice on the top.
Well, that's a given.
On the top 5 sports movie podcasts. Now, if you remember, I had said that Bad News Bears is it's not a high budget movie. It's not, there's not a lot of money. The budget was, but what year was Bad News Bears? 76? What
76.
Year? 76. Okay. So we had joked and said that we had watched porn that had more production value than Bad News Bears. Now, the other reference was to. Okay, so the the other reference was to, in The Wrestler, there's some very graphic scenes, in all seriousness, where he wrestles in CZW. He wrestles Necro Butcher, who's a local independent wrestler. He's pretty well known in independent wrestling circles. He's like Mick Foley times 50. His matches are insane, violent, glass. And so the scene where Randy the Ram wrestles Necro Butcher is very graphic, and that's what, sort of a genre of movies at the mid-2000s, like Hostel, Saw, these torture porn movies where it's very detailed, very graphic sort of violence.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would go for.
100%. But in speaking to my brother's thing about mentioning the songs are like those two Springsteen songs are identified with the movies that they came from. Should we have also mentioned Frank Stallone singing "Take You Back"? I mean, do we want to cover them all? No, but I mean those songs are very, very, like, most people who were born 1980 and after probably think that "Secret Garden" is the theme for Jerry Maguire. Truth is, the song itself came out 3 years before Jerry Maguire.
Okay, but
right.
But I agree with what you're saying. It's typically very much associated with that movie.
Absolutely, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not a huge fan of the song anyway, but that's got nothing to do with it. But The Wrestler was. It's not even on an album. It is sort of on an album. It's on the Working on a Dream album, but it's a bonus track. It's not even listed. You have to actually buy the CD and find it. And it's
was it not on his greatest hits?
Not The Wrestler.
No,
Secret
I'm
Garden
talking
was.
about
that's where Secret Garden was released on the Greatest Hits album, which came out in '95. So, and Jerry Maguire I think was '98. So, but yeah, come on, Steven, lighten up.
Well, Groo, so I want to start off by saying
thing today, I'll give him
today.
The
hold on, I'm officially proclaiming, with peace and love, no more top 10 podcasts effective on this date, March 28th. No more top 10 podcasts.
Why not? I like them.
Any requests will be tossed in the garbage. No more top 10 podcasts.
Why do you?
I just don't like them.
You know what? You know why I like them? Because it gives me, because it takes me away. Like the preparation that you and I do for this podcast, I do like the opening. The hour-long opening clip packages, and you do all the research and stuff. But I like when I'm given like a homework assignment, like when I have to like sit there and compile a list and give my I enjoyed that. I enjoyed doing that in preparation for that podcast. I guess people in the end people aren't interested in what we think, so I guess for those purposes.
I think what I do think is, as a pure broadcast, I like when we have a more definitive topic or person or event or music. It's just easier to research, and I just feel it allows us to have a better broadcast. That's just my bias.
All right, so why don't we say this? Why don't we amend the earlier amendment and say top whatever thing shows can only be used as bonus episodes. For example, if we've already done one for that week, or we are planning to do one for that week, if we decide on the spur of the moment, hey, let's come up with a 45-minute to an hour bonus episode, just flying off the from the hip, we can do that. How about we do that?
Yeah, like we can call it like a pandemic special.
There you go. Exactly, pandemic pod.
Yeah, 2 for 1. It's like buy one get one free. There you go.
Exactly. So let's. We don't even have to plan them out. Like, we already know what we're doing next week. And if we decide that we're just completely bored and going out of our minds still, and we need to exercise some demons by doing like our top 10 wrestling finishers or top 10 types of paint that are on the walls here or whatever, we can do it.
Okay. So speaking of homework and speaking of top 10, so you had asked me to watch Miracle and Seabiscuit, and I didn't get a chance to watch Seabiscuit, but I watched Miracle the movie, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on it. Good news is I enjoyed the film. I did enjoy the film.
Good.
Hockey scenes are top notch. Kurt Russell, Noah Emmerich, very, very strong. But I didn't know this at first, but when I went back and looked at it, and I wrote in my notes, this feels like a Walt Disney movie, and it is a Walt Disney movie. And to me, it's just very polished, sort of. It's almost like remember the Titans, like insert inspirational message here. Just felt a little too cliched for me. It's not that I did not like it, because I did. I'm just looking at my notes. And it's an amazing, very patriotic sort of topic, the 1980s men's U.S. Olympic hockey victory. It's a fine movie, but as I wrote in my notes, top 5, top 10, no way, not for me.
Yeah, well, everything you said there is true. It is.
Hockey scenes are really, really great.
Yeah,
They're great.
Everything you said there was true. It is very Disney-ish, just like Remember the Titans, which was Disney also. But for whatever reason, the movie just still hooks me in every time. Reminds me of the time that you and I went to see Legally Blonde. Do you remember that?
Which
in our weird days.
Very hokey, but I think I loved it.
We loved it. I remember we walked out. It was a day off from camp. We walked out of the theater in Binghamton, and we looked at each other, and we were like giving each other that look like, who's going to talk first? Who's going to say they liked it first? Like, I know he liked it, and he knows I liked it, but none of us want to admit it. So you were like, you had the guts to say it first, to be like, you know what? That movie was really hokey and dumb, and I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And I said, me too! That's the way I feel about Miracle. Yes, it's cliched, but it captures something with the performances by not just Kurt Russell and Noah Emmerich, but the players too. We knew them all, we were with them all. Look, we did this podcast already, but Miracle just really does it for me every time.
And so this is what I've always said, and I think this is what, when you talk about these top lists or favorites, we could watch something like Legally Blonde. We know that there's really no cultural gravitas or even fine art of filmmaking, yet we could walk out feeling completely satisfied and liking the movie.
Yeah. It's like walking out of the boot. No, I can't. We can't.
It's like, it was like, well,
we feel bad paying $1 to park the car, but then when we walk out, we're satisfied.
Well, it was like, how could you guys select Bad News Bears and I'm like, I think it's a classic, but that's just
our list.
My opinion.
It's our list.
All right, Groo. Let's talk real quick before we get to Bret the Hitman Hart. Weird time to be a wrestling fan, WWE fan. This whole coronavirus pandemic has now moved WrestleMania to a closed set. Unfortunately, we've had to, our trip is canceled, now taking place over 2 nights, Saturday, April 4th, Sunday, April 5th, rumored to be at the Performance Center and Full Sail University within closed sets. WWE announced that WrestleMania will be hosted by retired New England Patriot great Rob Gronkowski. Groo, I think we may have talked about this last week, but again, let me just ask you, thoughts on bringing in the Gronk?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like they could have done better than him, but I know that they're trying to bring him in full time, or at least as a Brock Lesnar type attraction for long term purposes. But in this situation, it's like they're throwing in the towel. But I feel like they could have made something really special about this. From the situation, and it looks like they're just trying to get through it. Because I'm not excited about Gronk. Where's that coming from? Nowhere. The battle royal.
Are you excited for WrestleMania?
No, because it's but that's okay. It's not their fault. They are doing the best they can. But no, I'm not excited. I'm bummed that we're not doing everything that we planned on doing, So I won't be able to get that. I'll watch it, but I won't be able to get that out of my head. I'll be like, all right, what could have been, And
That's
I'm not.
right.
It's not like I'm sitting there like, oh my God, WrestleMania is next week. I can't wait. No, it's like, let's just get it over with. Let's just get this whole goddamn thing over with. Hopefully, we'll all get through it without losing anybody close to us. God forbid, and get back to, what we love. Because right now, this is, like the novelty of the Performance Center shows has worn off. Let's put it that way.
Well, which I have been saying, it's not something you could do long term.
Right.
I think they've tried, like you said, the hard camera angle. They got rid of the seats. They've sort of tucked in the visuals. You don't see a lot of space. It's a tight camera shot. I think they've tried to add some wrestlers announcing, making side noise, trying to sort of distract from the visual of just seeing two people grapple in sort of a worked shoot anyway. And then when you don't have sort of the fogginess and sort of the disguising elements of a crowd and lights that you could sort of maybe hide some of the the gimmicks of wrestling, it does make for a tough visual. Prior to this, I think we were always excited, but I felt this year actually a little bit more excited. It seemed like some of the matches the early rumors we were vibing with, and it was in Florida. It was going to be essentially a short drive from Broward County to Tampa, relatively speaking, and we had tickets for NXT. All right, let me not get into it because I'll start getting depressed again. So, but we'll talk a little bit more next week about the build and our thoughts on WrestleMania. But Groo, speaking of wrestling,
and speaking of depression and griping.
Well, very good point. Let's take a nothing worthwhile look at one of the more controversial figures in professional wrestling's colorful history, Bret the Hitman Hart. And we got a lot to talk about. Bret Hart is the 8th child of wrestling patriarch Stu Hart and his wife Helen. We know that Bret Hart was born in Calgary, Alberta, into the massive Hart wrestling family. Bret Hart is a dual citizen of both Canada and the United States. He grew up in a household with 11 siblings. We know that Bret was introduced to professional wrestling at an early age. As a child, he witnessed his father training future wrestlers like superstar Billy Graham in what was known as the Dungeon. Mm-hmm. His household basement, which served as a training room. Stu Hart, Bret's father, was also a wrestling promoter. Bret had a hand in handing out flyers to local wrestling shows. In the 1998 documentary Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows, Bret Hart reflected on his father's discipline, how Stu would really beat him up physically and mentally, inflicting excruciating pain with submission holds that left broken blood vessels in Bret's eyes. And Bret said, my dad was otherwise a pleasant guy, but once he got you in the dungeon, it was pain. Groo, the Hart family dungeon almost has legendary lore if you are a professional wrestling fan. Numerous tales of numerous wrestlers cutting their teeth early in the game, getting trained by Stu Hart in the dungeon. Even the WWE has sent wrestlers to train with Stu Hart. It's been referenced in mainstream media, wrestling storylines. Groo, off the top of your head, thoughts on the Hart family dungeon?
It is legendary. I mean, there's a laundry list of people who train there, and yes, I have heard a lot of stories about Stu Hart and how much pain he would go through. It's almost like this generation's form of like massive yoga, like the kind of positions like they would describe, like taking your arm and putting it in your taking your right arm and putting it in your left back pocket, like just like weird stuff like that, just to make the body able to do the things that Stu Hart knew that it needed to do to be able to be a professional wrestler. And very few failures came out of that dungeon. Most of the people they trained really, really went somewhere, whether it was being big in territories or at the top in the WWE. I think Piper worked in the dungeon, but Piper was, I think, part of the family. I think he was related to the Harts in some way. I don't remember what, but the dungeon is a place of legend and lore.
Well, it was located in the Hart family mansion, and it was in the basement, had a very low ceiling. Stu Hart acquired the former Army Hospital Mansion in 1951, transformed the basement into his personal training center. Aside from professional wrestlers, the dungeon provided training grounds for various athletes from strongmen to football players. Let me give you a list of some of wrestling's best who worked in the dungeon. Of course, there's Bret and Owen Hart, superstar Billy Graham, Greg the Hammer Valentine, Davey Boy Smith, Flying Brian Pillman, Justin, Hall of Fame nominee Justin Thunder Liger, Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Chris Benoit, Justin Credible Edge Christian, Mark Henry, and Natalia, daughter of Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and the granddaughter of Stu, were all known to graduate from the dungeon.
Mark Henry trained in the dungeon?
Yes.
Wow. That I did not know. That's interesting. That's
one of the first... You'll like this, Groo. One of the first televised acknowledgments of the nickname Dungeon was by then WWF color commentator Jesse the Body Ventura.
What are you telling me that I said, Moody?
And then actually in July 1998, the WWF filmed a match between Owen Hart and Ken Shamrock. I vaguely remember this in the dungeon.
I remember that.
For one of their fully loaded pay-per-views.
I actually do remember that. I don't remember much about it, but I remember it happening. That wasn't. I guess it wasn't the slap me, the slap me match.
Are you referencing Ken Shamrock? And was that his sister Ryan Shamrock?
His kayfabe sister Ryan Shamrock. Slap me.
And why don't you tell our 14 listeners what exactly are you referencing to? Because it is a super great.
You can pull it on YouTube, I'm sure. But
yes,
Ken Shamrock was, he was an MMA fighter, and he entered the WWF at the time, and his promo skills weren't the best, and he had a sister, quote unquote. I forgot her real name. It wasn't Shamrock. That she was playing his sister. And they were getting into it. They were getting into a scripted argument down at ringside, and the camera was caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And as Ken Shamrock is yelling at his sister, you could hear him and see him say, "Slap me, slap me, slap me," and she goes, "What? Slap me?" And there you go. And it's like, "Oh my God! She just slapped her brother!" I remember. I think you and I were watching it at the time together. Maybe I remember laughing my ass off with somebody. I don't know who it was, or maybe it was Harvey the rabbit who has come back who is back now. Say hi, Harvey. No, he's shy. But that's something funny to pull up on YouTube if you want to see it.
Bret was a collegiate champion wrestler at Mount Royal College. He joined his father's Stampede Wrestling promotion. He first began helping the promotion by refereeing matches, as some wrestlers do. At a 1978 event in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, one of the wrestlers was unable to perform, and "Hey kid, put on the tights, get out there." And what people enjoyed about Bret was he did not ride on the coattails of his dad. He faithfully jobbed. As a quote, "No one could take a shit kicking like Bret Hart." Some of his early matches were against real-life trainers Mr. Hito, Mr. Sakurda. Also wrestled high-impact matches against Tom Billington, a.k.a. the Dynamite Kid. Bret Hart also wrestled Tiger Mask in New Japan Pro Wrestling. He remained Stampede Wrestling's most successful performer until the promotion, along with several wrestlers, was acquired by the WWF in August of 1984. So off Bret Hart goes to the World Wrestling Federation. Interesting enough, Groo, Hart was asked to start out in the WWF as a single wrestler with a cowboy gimmick. But initially he refused, stating, "Where I come from, if you call yourself a cowboy, you better be one." Bret Hart made his televised WWF debut on August 29, 1984, in a tag team match in which he teamed with Dynamite Kid. In 1985, he began getting the nickname of the Hitman. He requested to join Jimmy Hart's heel stable, the Hart Foundation, which include brother-in-law Jim the Anvil Neidhart. They began to tag. The Hart Foundation name then became exclusive to Bret and Neidhart and manager Jimmy Hart. He also earned Bret's agile technical style also earned him the moniker the Excellence of Execution, which was coined by Gorilla Monsoon.
Yeah.
This was an early time in which tag team wrestling was really, really a big part of the WWF's television shows. But looking back on it, nothing but great memories from the early days of the Hart Foundation. So, Groo, right off the top of your head, Bret Hart's in the WWF, Hart Foundation, Jim the Anvil. Thoughts on the Hart Foundation?
Well, my first memory of the Hart Foundation is from actually WrestleMania 2 when they were in that Battle Royal with all the football players. And I think Bret and the Anvil were the last two eliminated, both at the same time by Andre the Giant, if I'm not mistaken. But I do remember they were great heels. They cut great promos together, the three of them, Jimmy Hart, Bret, and the Anvil. They were actually my favorite tag team for a while because they had a great finisher that I forgot what it was called, the Heart Attack. They ended up calling it later, but I can't even describe it. Just running across the ring, and then
clothesline.
Yeah, the clothesline, but he's like sitting on his lap or something. They were great. They really were. They were terrific heels. And look, Bret, that was when I first started getting into wrestling, the 1985, 84, 85 era. So they were on top of the world at that point. I think they had won the titles from the British Bulldogs shortly after WrestleMania, and they were at the top of the card from then on. So yeah,
I think for me also as a.
But I'll forget it. That's the only reason I'll forget it. I never saw Bret as better than Jim. I always saw them as a tag team. I never thought that one could be a big singles competitor. I thought tag teams lasted forever, like the Killer Bees.
Well, that's sort of how. Listen, when we were young, everything the WWF and for that matter NWA put in front of us, we ate up. I'll get to that point about Bret Hart, but I think one of the things I loved early on about the Hart Foundation was there was such a contrast in styles. It was a great tag team. You had Bret was the technical wrestler. He gave the more measured promo. Mm-hmm. Jim the Anvil was the power. He gave a very frenetic promo, almost yelling, very over the top. Bret was almost serious. Anvil was the power moves. Bret was sort of the scientific, grappler, even submission style. And then, of course, you had Jimmy Hart, who was just the bomb back in that day. I mean,
yeah.
you got attached to Jimmy Hart. It was almost like gold. So let's talk about that 20-man battle royal. It was, I believe, it was referenced as the WWF versus the NFL battle royal, WrestleMania 2. I don't know if you, but I was there live at Nassau Coliseum watching it in closed circuit. So let's talk about it. NFL football players included Jimbo Covert, Bill Fralick, Russ Francis, Ernie Holmes, Harvey Martin, William the Refrigerator Perry, and for the WWF, stars included Andre the Giant, Ted Arcidi, Tony Atlas, the Hart Foundation, Killer Bees, B. Brian Blair, and Jim Brunzell. I think of Iron Sheik's promos on the Killer Bees. Hillbilly Jim, the Iron Sheik, King Tonga, Pedro Morales,
Rest in
Bruno, Danny Spivey, and Big John Studd. Of course, as you said, Andre, the final three participants, Andre first eliminated Neidhart and then Bret Hart to win the Battle Royal. I agree with you, but I remember as a kid being pleasantly surprised that Bret Hart made it, and it felt kind of right that Bret Hart was we knew Andre was going to win, but it felt kind of right to me that Bret was the last guy. First of all, it was a wrestler that was eliminated last, not an NFL football player. But
would that happen? Would that happen today?
There is a lack of protection for the business, I think, today. You might be right. I think under most circumstances, yes. But if you had an opportunity, let's say with a Rob Gronkowski, no, I think Vince McMahon obviously would pull the plug to make the headline and to make the money.
Yeah.
But I remember being like, ooh, Bret Hart. Like, I was very pleased that I knew Andre was going to win, and it made sense to me, but I was happy that Bret was the last guy in before Andre won.
The fridge was great in that Battle Royal, remember?
Well,
but my favorite was actually Freilich. Because do you remember Freilich got eliminated? He eliminated. Who did he? I don't know who he eliminated, but he got pulled out by like Big John Studd or something.
Yeah, well, Freilich was a real ripped guy. He was an offensive lineman for the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah. But I remember, obviously, Refrigerator Perry was the big fan favorite.
And then Perry pulled out Studd. Like from the outside, like he did the old like shake my hand bit. So Studd reaches out, shakes his hand, and the fridge just pulls him right out.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very cool battle royal. On one note, I was there live to see the New York portion of WrestleMania 2. I saw live the main event schmaz between Mr. T and Roddy Piper.
Oh, God.
And of all things, Groo, a boxing match, which was won by Mr. T as Roddy Piper was disqualified for body slamming Mr. T in the 4th round. A schmaz, but a fun schmaz at that. WrestleMania 2 Groo. It was in 3 locations, sort of ahead of its time in terms of a major event: New York, Chi-Town, and L.A.
Rosemont Horizon in Chicago.
Yeah. Any quick thoughts on WrestleMania 2?
Yeah, it was a cool. It was pretty cool actually the way they did it. The only problem is that if you watch it back today, unlike pretty much any other WrestleMania, there are filler matches. There are, Saturday morning style matches that would never make a WrestleMania card. I think because they had to give the live crowd, something more than just, 2 marquee matches, and then we moved to Chicago for the big battle royal, and then we moved to L.A. for the main event. So I remember there was like Jake the Snake's first big match at WrestleMania. He wrestled a guy named George Wells, and then had his like snake like bite him and stuff like that. And it was an experiment that succeeded at the time that I'm glad that they haven't done again. There's no need to. That's what I think about that. But the big matches in that, with the exception of the boxing match, okay, the Battle Royal was great. That tag team championship match, the Bulldogs versus the Dream Team, that was great. That was a great tag team match, and Bundy versus Hogan was great. It was very exciting. Oh, come on! It was so exciting. It was a great time to be a wrestling fan because it was like Hogan always. The great thing about Hogan was that they always found another ladder for him to climb, and that's something that they haven't really ever been able to do with anybody else, including Bret Hart. Once you're at the top, like somehow they were able to make the world champion for 3 years, Hulk Hogan, still be the underdog in most of his marquee matches. They have never been able to do that with anybody else that I can think of. They tried with Bret Hart, and it didn't work. Do you know what I mean, though?
It's a completely different time. I think social media has completely exposed wrestling, and I just don't think people have the attention span, or I think you're yearning for a time that's just no longer there.
Don't I always?
Even some of the stuff I think we taught, and I'm going to reference. I don't remember what feud, but I mean, it took the better part of a year. I mean, occasionally the WWE has dipped into feuds somewhat that lengthy, but it's bump into a guy and spill a little coffee on his shirt, and then we're in a first death blood match. I mean, it's just not the same.
What I mean is, like, even like when they used to do like not even monthly, but quarterly, they would have 4 Saturday Night's main events a year, I think.
Okay.
And each one of those, they were able to come up with another insurmountable challenge for Hulk Hogan, whether it was Earthquake, whether it was Bundy.
You were 10 years old, and you loved everything that they put in front of you.
Well, I'm still, in many ways, 10 years old.
I mean,
by the way, do you know that? Do you know the app, the Zoom app that everyone's using now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going live with our classes on Monday. Coming back from spring break, and you could do your virtual backgrounds. Like you could make your own backgrounds. So what do you think mine is?
What are you going to do? Hulk Hogan?
I'm in the. It'll look like my big head is in the ring at WrestleMania.
There you go.
So I have not come very far.
I'm sure your students will very much appreciate that.
They'll laugh for a couple seconds.
I mean, yeah, then they'll curse you out underneath their breath.
They do that anyway.
The Hart Foundation won their first of 2 WWF Tag Team Championships on February 7th, 1987, on an episode of Superstars of Wrestling where they defeated the British Bulldogs. The Hart Foundation at this time adopted the nickname the Pink and Black Attack, which Hart continued to use even after the tag team's disbandment. This was a reference to their team ring attire, as well as those famous Bret Hart signature mirrored sunglasses, which he would routinely give away to a young audience member for the match. Bret also increasingly described himself, Groo, as the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. Derived from the 1984 film The Natural, Bret would later justify this promo by 3 claims. He never injured an opponent through any fault of his own throughout the entire course of his career. He missed only 1 show as a result of flight difficulties, and he only once refused to lose a match, that final WWF match with longtime adversary Shawn Michaels, which we'll talk about, which culminated in the aforementioned Montreal Screwjob. So now we have a tagline, Groo, it's a good one. Thoughts on Bret Hart, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. Tagline, go.
Worked great.
Go.
Worked great. I don't believe it, but it's not a tagline to be believed. It's for promos, and it was great. He was terrific. He delivered.
Does it sound a little bit? Does it sound a little bit these days arrogant?
Very, but he started it when he was a heel. And he sold it. He sold it beautifully. Look, he was. I mean, we'll get into it, but he's one of the best wrestlers who has ever lived. The best actual wrestlers who has ever lived. But is he the best there is? No. Is he the best there was? No. And he's certainly not the best there ever will be. And he doesn't believe that either. But it worked for what it needed to do. It did what it needed to do, and it was a great catchphrase.
So I agree with everything you say except the last piece. I do believe he believes I do believe he believes that he was the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, to his detriment. And I want to say that because I think as we wrap up Bret Hart, it sort of talks to his psychology or how he saw himself, his character in WWE and professional wrestling.
Maybe there's an argument there for sure.
All right, well here, Groo. Let's talk about the Hart Foundation. They lost their WWF Tag Team Championship titles.
I know. A Strike Force, right?
You are correct for 10 points.
Yes.
On October 27th,
it was on like Wrestling Challenge. It was on like a Saturday
Superstars
morning.
of Wrestling.
Yes.
Actually, it's funny, Groo. I actually have in my notes Strike Force Groo. Andrew, which wrestlers made up the team known as Strike Force?
It was, of course, the great Rick Martel and the 3-time Intercontinental Champion Arriba Santana, Tito Santana.
Very good on paper. Both 2 very solid mat wrestlers. Probably in today's age, really could have been $1 million tag team. The team was played off as good-looking pretty boys.
Girls in cars, Girls
Yeah,
in
which
cars.
actually came from the tag team predecessor, the Can-Am Connection. Grew for 15 points. What two wrestlers made up the Can-Am Connection?
The can part, the Canadian part, was, of course, Rick Martel. And the American part, the am part, was the late, great Tom Zink.
Wow, this guy knows his own.
You knew I would know that. You knew I would know that. Come
I
on.
know.
Let me ask you a question. Okay.
I know I'm going to fall short, but go ahead.
The Can-Am Connection was the first match in what is considered still to be one of the top 3 WrestleManias of all time, WrestleMania 3. Who did they wrestle in that opening match of WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome in 1988? 87.
I'm going to. I don't know why. I'll just go Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zukov. Like, was it one of those?
No.
No,
it was actually it wasn't an actual tag team. It was 2 wrestlers put together. It was Ace Cowboy Bob Orton and the magnificent Don Morocco.
I just threw up in my mouth a little.
Hey, you started this Rick Martel trivia there, man.
This is actually great stuff. This is like my youth. I remember. I woke up early on Saturday. It was for early morning cartoons and Channel 9 WWF wrestling shows.
Damn
Superstar.
right.
The name Strike Force came from Tito Santana's promise that as a team they would strike with force.
Poor Tito. He was so good, and he just got so watered down in that, I think. Even though they were champions, it just, I don't know.
Yeah, they actually beat the Hart Foundation for the Tag Team Championship on October 27, 1987, when Jim Neidhart submitted to Rick Martel's Boston Crab.
Yep, I remember.
So, Groo, let me ask you a question. Has the Boston Crab lost all effectiveness as a finisher?
I haven't seen it since then. And I remember, was that even his finisher?
I have no idea.
I don't even think so, but I remember he had the anvil in the Boston Crab. The crowds are going crazy, and Rick Martel can't help himself. He's sitting there smiling. Like, he's got this big grin on his face, like he knows they're about to win the titles. I mean, it was so silly, but it was so exciting. Because, you know us, we always rooted for the good guys. You know? I mean, but when we were kids, we did. Right?
They don't make finishers like they used to, though.
That's
like the DDT.
that's for sure.
Now that's like a setup move. I mean, it's just.
I think
to a detriment. I mean, really, the finishing moves these days. I mean, there's so many kickouts now. When it happened on occasion, it was so exciting. But now it's like every Raw, SmackDown pay-per-view, somebody's kicking out of somebody's big-time finisher.
Yeah. Is there a finisher left that has not been kicked out of or broken? I can't think of one.
I'll give you that.
Maybe Jake's DDT. I can't remember anyone kicking out of that, but I can't. I know people have kicked out of like the Perfect Plex and the Rude Awakening and a lot of those old school ones, but I can't remember the DDT was so freaking lethal. I mean, you could one false move and you're dead with that one.
Well, Groo, let's go back real quick. Strife actually held on to the title until WrestleMania 4, where they lost the Tag Team Championship to Demolition. Martel had smashed the Boston Crab until Axe hit him in the back of the head with Mr. Fuji's cane. Groo, we may talk about Tito Santana and Rick Martel somewhere down the road, but maybe you've referenced it earlier. Groo, before we get back to the Hart Foundation, thoughts on Strike Force?
We cheered for them. They were good guys. They were fun. I always loved Tito Santana.
Handsome devils.
Very handsome, very handsome. Martel and they had good chemistry, but they were too babyface. Martel was able to break out of that when he turned heel.
Yes, he did.
But Tito could never. He was. For the rest of his career, they tried with the Matador gimmick, but for the rest of his career, he was basically the other guy from Strike Force. The poor
well,
bastard.
the El Matador gimmick was really the kiss of death. Actually, when I think about it, he was just that ceiling. He was mid card at best. He just break out of that ceiling. And again, that was a different time. Tito Santana on WWF television was the exception to the rule. I mean, it really was mostly big white dudes, just and the Tito, you were lucky if you saw a wrestler and minority wrestler getting a shine. But Tito had some spotlights, but he had definitely a ceiling there. Definitely a ceiling there.
Yeah.
Back to the Hart Foundation, they began their second and final WWF Tag Team Championship reign by defeating Demolition members Crush and Smash in a 2 out of 3 falls match with some help from the Legion of Doom. Interesting here, October 30th, the Hart Foundation lost the title to the Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, but a few days later, President Jack Tunney reversed the decision, and the win was never acknowledged on television, and I believe this was because the ring ropes broke, and the match was a kind of a schmaz, or the drizzly shits, as they say. Do you remember that? But it was because the ropes broke, and they didn't like how it came out on television.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
Hart Foundation's reign lasted until WrestleMania 7, where they lost to the Nasty Boys, after which the Hart Foundation team split. Groo, in an era where greatness is often exaggerated, you have a truly talented tag team featuring the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. Groo, before we move on, final thoughts on the Hart Foundation.
One of the greats. One of the greatest tag teams ever. They just had it all. They had in-ring skills. They had great chemistry. They had the name. They had, and I guess a lot of that comes from them being trained together in the dungeon. But yeah, Hart Foundation, absolutely legendary. I'm glad that they got inducted into the Hall of Fame as a team last year. Definitely deserved. And rest in peace, Anvil, the Rhino. Yeah.
All right, let's go on to
was that a moment of silence for
that was a moment of silence. Yes, Bret Hart won his first WWF Intercontinental Championship by defeating Mr. Perfect with the sharpshooter at SummerSlam 91.
We were there.
Bret subsequently won the 91 King of the Ring tournament as well, September 7, 1991. Bret Hart pinned Roddy Piper for his second Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania 8 later that year, making him the first wrestler known in the WWF and one of the few wrestlers ever to legitimately pin Roddy Piper's shoulders to the mat.
Yep.
1, 2, 3, and what was a well-received match. I didn't really know that. Actually, that was something new. Was Roddy Piper not a guy to job or not a guy
not
to be pinned?
Not in the WWF. He didn't put anybody over. But he was never really. The strange thing is, he was never really criticized for it, as so many other people who refused to job even once. But for whatever reason, Piper got away with it, and God bless him. I think, because I read his book, and his argument was it had to make sense, and it never really made sense. Because his argument was, once you get pinned, your character has to reboot. And as the vicious heel that he was at the time, it would have destroyed the character. And I'll buy that.
I agree. There's some truth to that.
I'll buy that. But nowadays it's a lot different. You can get pinned one night and then come back and still be top of the heap tomorrow night. So
yeah. Well,
it's just.
I agree. I mean, you can be dogged out for a year and then you go on a great run, and wrestling fans have short memories.
Yep. But God bless Piper, though. He was something else. And that was a great match, and I'm still pissed off that Bret Hart won that match, because that was the only title that Piper ever held in the WWF/WWE. And I was, you know me, I'm a huge Piper fan.
All right, get over it. At wrestling,
I love those 2 little seconds of silence. That's not like technical delays, ladies and gentlemen. That's Evan just looking at me like, all right, enough shit. You know.
John Connor had to die at a wrestling.
Wait, I watched Dark Fate yesterday again. All right, that's for another time.
You really need to let this go. You need to let this go, man.
I texted. Wait, what time did I? Well, it was like 1 a.m. for me, and I go on these rants when I'm watching these things, and I texted you like this long rambling thing about why Terminator Dark Fate wasn't great but was still good. Like, I don't know.
It was good.
It was
good. It was good. At Wrestling Challenge taping on July 21st, 1992, Bret Hart defeated Shawn Michaels to win the Intercontinental Championship belt, which was suspended above the ring in what is known as the WWF's first ever ladder match. He dropped the IC Championship to his brother-in-law, Davey Boy Smith, in Hart's first WWF pay-per-view main event at SummerSlam 1982, held before 80,000 fans at Wembley Stadium. PWI readers voted it Match of the Year, and the WWE named the match as the greatest in the history of SummerSlam. Upon being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 06, Bret Hart cited that contest as his favorite match of the year. I remember just the pure, stunning, massive crowd. The WWF finally goes big. Groo, the Hitman versus the Bulldog at Wembley Stadium. Any thoughts?
Incredible match. Long, but never boring. Those two went at it. And from my recollection, to show you how good Bret Hart was, his description of that match in his book, which I read, Davey Boy Smith was not in very good wrestling mode at the time, and Hitman really had to carry him. And if you watch the match today, it's an incredible match. So it just shows you how good the best way to tell if a wrestler is a really great wrestler is if he can make a lesser wrestler look great. And that's Bret Hart did that in that match, and it was an incredible match. And it's interesting that you note that, because that's 2 years in a row at SummerSlam where Bret Hart was involved in 2 of the best intercontinental matches ever. The one against Mr. Perfect is considered a classic as well. But yeah, this Wembley Stadium one was phenomenal. I remember it was very exciting.
You referenced Davey Boy. Are we talking about drugs and alcohol?
I think he had demons that go back a long time, and my recollection is that he was physically not powerful or physically not able to do the things that he used to be able to do. And I could be mixing up. I don't know. I could be mixing something up there, but I remember reading Bret's description of that match and how much Davey Boy really needed Bret to get him through. Maybe it was another match between the two later on, because I don't remember Davey Boy Smith having those kind of problems that early, but who knows. But either way, whether he had to carry him or not, it's still an incredible match. And it's one that you can watch over and over again and never get bored of it. That's rare.
Well, let's go on to Bret Hart's first run as WWF World Champion, defeating Ric Flair at a Superstar taping, again in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, October 12th of that year, in a match that was not originally broadcast on WWF television. The Hitman would headline his first pay-per-view as a champion with a successful title defense against Shawn Michaels at the 1992 Survivor Series, and then went on to defeat Razor Ramon at the 1993 Royal Rumble. Eventually, though, Bret Hart would lose his title to Yokozuna in his first WrestleMania main event at WrestleMania 9 after interference from Mr. Fuji. Fuji then challenges Hulk Hogan, who had come out to help Bret Hart to compete for the title. Hogan then goes on to win his 5th WWF World Heavyweight title from Yokozuna. In June, according to Bret, he was scheduled to regain the WWF World Heavyweight Championship from the Hulkster at SummerSlam, but Hogan chose to drop the title to Yokozuna instead at the King of the Ring. The beginnings of rumored heat with the Hulkster. Grew thoughts on Mania 9 with Bret taking the loss and the Hulkster yet again getting the spotlight. Was it the right move at the time?
You're not going to get me to trash Hulk Hogan. You're not going to get me to trash Hulk Hogan. You're not going to get me to trash Hulk Hogan. No, it was not the right move, but it was. I have mixed feelings about it because if it was done in a different way, it could have worked. You knew they needed to put the title back on Hogan. He had just come back, and he was still the face of the company. You know, Bret really thought that he was the number one guy, but when Hogan's in the room, all eyes are on Hogan. So they had to find a way to do it.
WrestleMania 9 was I'm getting the feeling here business is down a little bit. Maybe they're feeling a little heat. They got to put it on the top guy?
Probably, and but the show itself...
it's not a great WrestleMania.
No, but part of that has to do with the fact that it's at the MGM Grand...
yes.
A very weird outdoor daytime venue. There's a very low quality feel to the whole show as far as how it's filmed. It doesn't have that big, nighttime glamour thing with all the flash photography going off and the signs and the screaming. It just lost a lot of that. There was some very bad undercard matches too. I'm thinking of like Giant Gonzalez and Undertaker. It was just, and Hogan was coming back after like a year off, so he wasn't in the best shape, but he was still the Hulkster. And they had to, I guess they did what they had to do. Bret certainly had his issues with it. So while I will say that it wasn't done the right way, I will also say that Bret took it way too personally. And I know that that's one of the things that he continues to gripe about these days. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of griping. All right, well, let's go through. We're going to try to run through this pretty quickly, so I'm not going to go through every little thing, but let's go on from there. Bret Hart enters a lengthy feud with Jerry the King Lawler, who they both sort of argue over who is the king, the coronation, claimed that he was the only king, attacked Bret Hart and began a barrage against Hart and his family. The two met at SummerSlam 93 to determine the undisputed king of a World Wrestling Federation. Bret Hart originally wins the match by submission via the sharpshooter. He would not let go, and the decision was reversed to a Lawler victory. Blah, 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 blah. After months with dealing with Lawler, Hart received a WrestleMania 9 rematch with the WWF World Heavyweight Champion Yokozuna. The match won. Yokozuna had Yokozuna locked in the sharpshooter. Owen comes down, decided to congratulate his brother. The referee begins questioning Owen's motives, which allows Fuji to assault Bret. And of course, this sets in motion a series of brotherly disagreements that would span the entirety of 1994. Back and forth. Owen blames Bret. Let's see here. He gets eliminated in a Survivor Series. It was the Harts taking on a Shawn Michaels team. And actually, that was a substitution for Lawler, who I believe was going through some really heavy legal issues at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Underage females.
What'd you say about me? Oh, you mean Lawler.
Hey now.
He's expunged. Lawler can never stay out of trouble. I don't know what's with that guy. But he always comes back. But yeah, I do remember that Survivor Series, that match where it looked like they were getting along and then somebody hit somebody and then Owen just went crazy and that was it.
Fast forward to the 1994 Royal Rumble. Amid controversy, Bret Hart and Lex Luger were the final two participants, and the two were eliminated over the top rope at the same time. Therefore, both men were named co-winners of the 94 Royal Rumble match and received title shots at WrestleMania 10. Luger won the chance to face Yokozuna first, with Hart having to wrestle his brother Owen before receiving the title shot. So, all right, take me through this, Groo. Does Luger actually face Yoko at WrestleMania 10?
Yes, we were there. Don't you remember?
I don't remember.
Yes,
Luger. I don't remember this match at all.
I'll tell you. The first match of the night was Bret versus Owen, which Owen won clean.
Great. That was a great match.
Incredible match. One of the ones Bret will tell you that he's at least that's what he told me. It's one of the ones that he's most proud of in his career. And then a couple matches later, Luger went against Yokozuna. They called out the special guest referee, a returning Mr. Perfect, who disqualified Luger after Luger got angry with him for not counting fast enough. So it was like,
oh Lord.
Yeah, it was them sticking it to Luger, because Luger was actually supposed to win the title that night, and I think this is according to some of the podcasts that I've heard, like Pritchard and those guys. According to them, Luger, the company had just kind of lost faith in Luger. They didn't see him as the top guy, and they didn't give it to him. They gave him the chance to run with the torch a little bit with that whole Lex Express thing a year before, and it just wasn't catching fire the way it should have. So they were going to see if that twisted Royal Rumble ending would sort of push him in the right direction. And a lot of people blame Luger's attitude, because Luger was definitely not he wasn't very good with the fans. He was kind of like a Brock Lesnar, just kind of very standoffish. And if you're going to have your top guy needs to be, he needs to be somewhat corporate. He really does. So that is, I believe that's the behind the scenes story on that, and that left the door wide open for Bret. And he goes in and he puts on. It's not easy to put on a great match with Yokozuna. Bret Hart did it, and it was a very exciting match.
So you have a feud established
with special guest referee Roddy Piper.
So you have a feud established for the better part of a year, Bret versus Owen. We spoke about it a little bit earlier, but when you look at the pacing of major feuds in the WWF back in the day, I mean, this would I think we mentioned it earlier, but this would never happen. We don't see feuds for a year. We don't see
the last 2 weeks, But that's the state of the business as it is. I mean, there's no way to sustain feuds, even if they tried. It would never work. You've got too much programming. So, you're reaching back to an era that's long gone, Evan.
That's right.
What is the matter with you? Enough, let it go. Wait a second. I'm reading your lines.
Bret Hart continued to feud with his brother Owen while also starting a feud with Diesel. Bret Hart's friend and former tag team partner Jim the Anvil Neidhart returned to the WWF, reunited with Hart at the King of the Ring.
Oh, I love this. I remember being so excited.
Hart defended the WWF World Heavyweight Championship against Diesel. When Hart was winning the match, Shawn Michaels interferes on Diesel's behalf. Diesel appears close to victory after he delivers a jackknife powerbomb. Yet before he can pin Hart, Neidhart interferes. Therefore, Diesel wins by disqualification. Hart retains his title. Neidhart left when Diesel and Michaels attacked Hart following the match. Neidhart's motivation was made simply clear when he helped Owen win the tournament that night so he could receive a title shot against his brother. At SummerSlam, Hart successfully retained the WWF World Heavyweight Championship against Owen in a steel cage match. This match received a 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer of Wrestling Observer, and the brothers' feud was voted Feud of the Year by readers of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Before we move on, Groo, you're better with that classic wrestling. Just how good of a feud was the brotherly feud between Bret and Owen?
It was awesome because it had built. I mean, and you know why it was awesome? Because of Owen Hart. Owens really sold the hell out of that living in his brother's shadow stuff. I mean, he was great. He really was. On top of being like Bret. Actually, I think Bret considers Owen to be the better wrestler, the better technical wrestler. Yeah, it's in the book. And Owen, look, Owen was a heel most of his career, but everybody respected his ability, and that feud worked because Owen sold the hell out of it. He really did, and it was great.
I think Owen was a little bit more of a bumping machine, and he was a little more of a high flyer. I think Bret might have been a little bit more the superior technical mat wrestler.
Maybe. Hey, I'm just saying what his opinion is. Their styles are very different, but they had great chemistry in the ring. Their matches were always great. And I give, we know what we always knew what Bret was capable of, but this is where Owen, after a couple of failed gimmicks and with the new foundation and high energy and the blue blazer, all of that quote unquote new generation stuff. Now here he was finally coming into his own, and he had to turn heel to do it, but he became one of the top heels, and he did an incredible job with it. What a great feud that was.
Thanks for the positive affirmation. I give one opinion, and you go, maybe. Anyway, Bret Hart eventually loses his WWF World Heavyweight Championship at Survivor Series in a submission match against Bob Backlund. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you.
No, I wouldn't have gotten it, but this is that era where, 2 nights later, Diesel won it, right?
No, but you mentioned the new generation. I mean, that was the moniker that the WWF was presenting at that time to its fans, and it's such an interesting time because you're talking. It's that Hulk Hogan cartoony era, and then you're going right into the Attitude Era, and it's sort of it's that era in between where they were really struggling. You still had your cartoonish gimmicks, but you started to see some real mat wrestlers like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. That it's just I find a very interesting time in the WWF's history.
Yeah, but if I'm Bret Hart and I'm losing to Bob Backlund, that's one gripe that I would side with Bret Hart with, because Backlund was he hadn't been around for 10 years. He was older, and he was never great in the first place. He was always good.
Wait a second. Hold on. It was a different era, yes, and don't goof on me, but I think Backlund was champion for 6 years. I mean, he was the guy who held the belt. I mean, MSG, all that stuff that we started getting interested. I mean, I would go back. I can remember really young, early on Bruno. I mean, Bruno late in his career champion. But I mean, Backlund, I'm not saying he certainly wasn't a big time personality, but the guy was babyface champ for how many years?
Yeah, but I was not. See, I became a fan of wrestling after the first WrestleMania. So the Backlund days were already gone.
Okay, fine.
So to me, he was a novelty. Here's this was the one champion who predates the Iron Sheik here. We'll get him back, and obviously they're going to put the title on him, put him for 2 days, and then he loses to somebody else. But did it have to be Bret Hart? I mean,
well, let's talk about it. So he loses in a submission match against Bob Backlund, where they sort of reference the loss to the Iron Sheik. They have two managers. So Davey Boy Smith was the manager for Bret Hart, Owen for Bob Backlund, and of course Davey Boy throws in the towel while Hart was in Backlund's cross-face chicken wing. Davey Boy was kayfabe knocked out. Owen pursued his mother, Helen, to throw in the towel.
Yes.
Bret, giving Backlund the championship victory.
Poor Bret.
Bret's feud with Bob Backlund would continue into the following year. Wow. He was voted the greatest wrestler of 1994 by PWI. Groo, Bob Backlund. Here's my notes. You probably could do 5 hardcore wrestling podcasts on the career of Bob Backlund, but for time's sake, thoughts on the mid-'90s return of Mr. Bob Backlund. They changed him now a little bit, if you remember. He was a straight scientific wrestler back in the 80s. He came back as sort of a crazy politician type with a much more sort of outgoing personality. They sort of teased that he was even borderline insane. The cross-face chicken wing, which was a scientific submission, was now almost sold as a torture like a torture.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on Bob Backlund's return? I mean,
when Backlund came back first, I believe it was around the Royal Rumble time, and he put on a very strong showing in the Royal Rumble, and he was a face. He wasn't the nut job yet. He was still kind of like the old Bob Backlund, and then he beat Bret in that way. He was still a face, still the old, and then somewhere along, like after he lost the title to Diesel and started that real long hardcore feud with Bret Hart, that's when they turned him into the Mr. Backlund character, and it was cartoony, but it was fun. He was a riot. He was fun to watch. I got to give him that.
3 days after Hart's title loss, Diesel defeats Bob Backlund in 8 seconds with a jackknife powerbomb to become the new WWF World Heavyweight Champion, no less at a house show.
Yeah, it wasn't televised, right?
Okay, thank you. Let me finish
my
narrative.
I was asking.
Let me finish my narrative. Go to your room. Oh, wait. Very famous footage of Diesel. Well, this was different at the time. You never saw footage of a house show. I mean, they got rid of all that stuff years ago.
Sure.
Very famous footage of Diesel absolutely wrecking Backlund with just a shit jackknife powerbomb. very, very different for its time, because if you remember, they show the house show footage, and it was like sort of cut, edited in a smooth TV package, sort of gearing up Diesel on Wrestling Superstars.
Right.
But it's like you said, they prop up Bob Backlund and they completely trash him. As you know, the WWF yet again puts the title on a massive, muscular face. Are you on camera? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here.
I mean, I don't know. It was kind of different for its time. Any thoughts on that whole 8-second squash by Diesel on Backlund?
I think that it did what it needed to do. It was, Diesel was not. They needed to push Diesel all the way to the top, and they needed a quick way to do it, and they found it. He won to win the world title in a squash like that, and Backlund was probably the best person to do it against, because Backlund was probably like, "Hey, pin me, pay me," because he was on the downward slope of his career at that point. And it worked. Definitely worked for Diesel. Didn't work so well for Bret Hart, but worked like it was perfect for Diesel. He went on a run.
Yeah.
He went on an incredible run for a while.
You know what I always say? If it bleeds, we can kill it.
What's the other one? I don't trust anything that bleeds for 7 days and doesn't die. Something like that.
1995, Bret Hart was focused on projects outside of the wrestling business, such as acting, and he shifted to the number 2 face in the company behind Diesel. Hart challenged Diesel for WWF World Heavyweight Championship at the 95 Royal Rumble in a match that was continually marred by outside interference and ruled a draw. Both men embraced in a homoerotic display of sportsmanship after that. In a rematch from the Survivor Series, Bret defeats Bob Backlund in an I Quit match at WrestleMania 11. Bret Hart was.
Is that where they got the idea? Is that where that movie got the idea of "I wish I knew how to quit you"?
Oh yes,
Brokeback something.
Yes. So look, Bret was critical of the I Quit match against Backlund, claiming it was probably his worst pay-per-view match he ever had. But let's get right to it, where it really kicks in for Bret Hart. WWF Commissioner Roddy Piper rules that Hart would face Shawn Michaels, who had earned a WWF Heavyweight Championship match at WrestleMania 12 by winning the Royal Rumble in a 60-minute Iron Man match at the event. The wrestler with the most decisions during the 60 minutes would win the match and the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. At the match grew with less than a minute left on the clock, and the score still 0-0. Michaels jumps from the middle rope. His legs were caught by Hart. Hart locks in the sharpshooter. However, Michaels did not submit in the last 30 seconds. The match ended in a tie. WWF President Gorilla Monsoon rules the match a draw and would continue in a sudden death overtime. Michael hits the super kick to win the championship. Pro Wrestling Illustrated readers voted it match of the year. You could probably spend 2 hours, Groo, just talking about the WrestleMania Iron Man match. It was unique, the first of its kind that I can remember in sort of our modern pro wrestling era history. Slick TV packages selling us on the personalities of the two combatants, the flashy, over-the-top, arrogant Chippendales, superior athleticism of Shawn Michaels versus the low-key, grounded but superior mat wrestler of Bret the Hitman Hart. In the end, Groo, it was Michaels who gets the nod in a truly amazing match. Yet it was the Michaels victory that, to me, foreshadows this rivalry and how it's going to be handled moving forward until the bitter end. Groo, it's a big one. Thoughts on the Iron Man match and its controversial finish?
Well, we have to talk about that. We got to talk about the match that came before it: Piper versus Goldust in the Hollywood Backlot Brawl. I
love that match.
So did I. With the fake OJ Bronco chase. Yeah, that was great. But yeah, it was. I've always criticized this match for one thing, and that's the end, because for an hour it was one of the best matches you'll ever see. But then, when the time limit goes, it becomes just a regular wrestling match. Whoever gets the pin wins. They really should have had... I felt like they really should have had it be exactly what it was supposed to be. Whoever's got more of them when that clock winds down is the winner. I know what they were going for, and I guess it worked. Most people think more highly of it than I do, but I just remember being disappointed in that ending, I think because it was predictable. I remember thinking, like, there's no way they could give either one the super clean win here for a match like this. So they're going to have to come up with something extra. And they did. So, but for 60 minutes, it's one of the best matches you'll ever see. Absolutely.
Do you agree with me in the sense that this match foreshadows the whole Hart-Michaels rivalry, in the sense that it just feels like throughout their long history, Vince McMahon or the WWF, they always preferred, even ever so slightly, Shawn Michaels over Bret Hart?
Maybe, but and I'm coming from you didn't read Bret Hart's autobiography?
I think I want to say Craig maybe have lent it to me, and I read a lot. I mean, bits and pieces of it. But give me some knowledge. What do you got?
At this point, he and Shawn were friends. They really respected each other.
Let me ask you a question. Was he not pissed off about the ending though? Because I think Hart says, like, "Give me my effing belt," and ripped it out of the referee's hands and kind of preened, and it was sort of like a very sort of choreographed ending where he puts his hands in his face in the boyhood dream. Was Bret pissed off about that a little bit at the end of the match?
You mean, did he think that Shawn was showing him up?
Yes.
He didn't mention that in anything that I've seen. The only, Bret felt that he should have won the match, but he didn't place that blame on Shawn Michaels. But his attitude towards it was the main event at WrestleMania. It's gone down in history as a great match, and that's more important than anything else. That's Bret's perspective of it. So, like, any griping, you're never going to hear him gripe about that match.
Okay.
And that's does it to answer your question, does it foreshadow? It wasn't meant to foreshadow, but consider in hindsight, absolutely.
I don't think it. Yeah, I mean, to me, when you watch that match, it's like Borg versus McEnroe. But at the end, you knowing the rivalry, I just feel like Vince McMahon or the powers that be at the WWF, wherever the hell you are, there you are. I don't know. You feel like even to this day, it's just if they had to go with somebody, they preferred the more athletic and showy Shawn Michaels.
Yeah,
maybe rightfully so, maybe not.
Maybe, but we didn't know that at the time. That's the thing. Like I said, hindsight, we could look at it now and say, okay, they're really pushing this new generation, because Bret Hart's still kind of the old generation, So they were.
Well, Shawn Michaels had been there for a while too.
Not quite as long as Bret, though. I think. Bret,
okay, but I mean, he's been there with the Rocker. I mean, he's had a pretty long history.
That's true. That's true. That's true. But I think Yeah, that's what do you ask? what
I don't know.
I don't know. The sound just changed for a second. Oh,
are we okay?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
We're fine.
All right, listen.
All right, go ahead. Well, what'd you ask?
All right, that fall, Bret Hart would. Well, let's talk about his contract. He received competing offers of employment from both his home of the WWF and WCW, World Championship Wrestling. WCW was rumored to have presented Hart with a 3-year, $9 million contract offer, while the WWF responded with an unprecedented 20-year contract. I don't know the terms of money. On October 21st that year, Bret Hart elected to re-sign with the WWF. This was the infamous 20-year contract for Bret Hart, less money up front than WCW, but it gave Bret the stability that he craved, as he stated that he wanted to retire with the WWF. We know that 20-year contract will come into play in just a short year or two from now. Over the next summer, one stone cold Stephen Austin, by the way, the topic of 83 weeks, I think a couple of weeks ago, Eric Bischoff did a very nice podcast on Stone Cold Steve Austin. Suggest that you listen to it on 83 weeks. But Austin, fresh from winning the 96 King of the Ring, continually taunted Bret Hart and challenged him to come back to the WWF and have a match. You know, Groo, that King of the Ring victory in which Austin popped his infamous Austin 316 promo as they pulled a broken, chunky Jake the Snake Roberts to the back. Groo, that's got to be one of the greatest promos of all time, correct?
Yeah, it changed everything. Yeah, absolutely.
After an 8-month hiatus from television, Bret Hart returned and defeated Stone Cold at Survivor Series in a match for the #1 contender spot. Listen, we can go back and forth. However, they back and forth on the storyline. We get a Bret Hart loss to Psycho Sid, and here's where we start really kicking it into high gear. We talked about this off camera. Bret Hart shoves announcer Vince McMahon to the ground when he attempts to conduct a post-match interview in which they engage in sort of the first known work shoot, expletive, curse-laden rants against McMahon and the WWF management. Of course, Groo, this incident has been cited as one in which helped to lay the foundations of the WWF's Attitude Era, as well as being the starting point of the Vince McMahon on-air character, the tyrannical WWF owner, Mr. McMahon. In terms of wrestling, Groo, just brilliant, in-your-face stuff, the beginnings of Mr. McMahon, maybe the end of kayfabe, the beginnings of the coronavirus. Groo, I don't know what the hell's going on. Bret Hart gets physical with Vince McMahon on Raw. Great beginnings, Groo, or the end of the business as we know it?
Both. The end of what we grew up with, but the beginning of something that we would take to like flies on shit, man. We were that was appointment television every Monday night, seeing that stuff happen. So the answer to your question is both. You know, that's what more can you say? This was something the likes of which we had never seen before.
I think somebody like Mick Foley would say this is probably right before when the Attitude Era hit big. Mick Foley's always said that, I don't know if that's 97, 96, 97, but he felt like the WWF was doing its best work just right before that Attitude Era really killed it. I mean, that was, you know, when you start talking about the return of the Hart Foundation and the whole USA Canada thing. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty hot stuff.
It was phenomenal. I was actually watching. I was looking for one of them the other day. No. Well, what the hell else am I going to do? Lesson.
I know, but you're like the one guy who goes.
Lesson
You're like
plans?
the one guy. You're the one guy who goes like on a Wednesday at 2:00. You go. You know, I want to see episode 71, June 12th of 96. You know.
No,
The Rock eats pancakes episode of Raw. You know,
no, it was pie, and you know it.
Okay, that's true.
But I was looking for specific things. The episode where Davey Boy is fighting Owen, and Bret comes out and stops them from fighting, and basically completes the heel turn. You know, like he says, like we're look what McMahon's making us do. Look what these fans are making us do. Screw the fans. So I wanted to see that. And then every time that they would come out and just stand up at the top of the ramp and go off on whatever faction was in the ring, whether it was Nation of Domination or Austin or DX was starting, like it was just Hunter, Triple H, and Triple H, Michaels, and Chyna at the time. But all of that was firing on all cylinders. And, they had Pillman with them. It was amazing. It was great television, I have to say. Neidhart came back again. And it was great to have him there. So it was like Neidhart, Owen, Davey Boy, and Pillman, and Bret. And Bret was sort of even like turning into like the Mr. McMahon thing, like when he got hurt and he would come out in a wheelchair, like he was playing the victim. Oh man, Bret was awesome. He was just awesome there.
Well, let's get to sort of before it happens. WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart and Stone Cold have their rematch in a submission match that would later get a 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer. In the end, Bret Hart locks the sharpshooter on a bloody Stone Cold Steve Austin, who refuses to give up. In fact, Austin never quit Groo, but passed out from blood loss and pain. Ken Shamrock, your special guest referee, wearing very homoerotic garb. I mean, he's got bike shorts on that, there's not an inch of movement. And
that referee cutoff would have done great in prison with those stripes.
One false move and you're getting, it's all spilling out. Shamrock awards Hart the match, after which he continues to assault Austin, thus turning heel. The match is so famous, double switch. It was named by Match of the Year by the Wrestling Observer newsletter, voted Match of the Year by PWI. Later that night, Hart confronts Psycho Sid and The Undertaker prior to their match for the WWF World Heavyweight Championship. Hart insults The Undertaker and told Shawn Michaels, who was the guest commentator for the match, not to interfere. Undertaker wins the match, and then which ends as Hart hot-shotting Sid on the ropes, costing him the title. A lot to digest here. Groo, the infamous Blood from a Stone match, considered one of the greatest Mania matches of all time, sets the course for Stone Cold Steve Austin to become quite possibly the most famous superstar ever, while setting the wheels in motion for Bret Hart to live forever in WWE infamy. Blood from a Stone, Groo, what do you think?
Never saw it. No, just kidding. Classic.
Will you stop?
Yeah, will you stop? Absolute classic. You said it all. It moved everything. It's the classic example of taking a story from point A to point B, like Pritchard always says. And it's an amazing match leading up to that point, and just seeing the crowd going from one side of the ring to the other throughout the course of that match kind of reminded me of Hogan versus The Rock in that time and later on. But not Hogan and The Rock wasn't as extreme, but this was, Hart came into the ring a full-fledged face. Austin had been building up some facedom, but he was still the bad guy, and the crowd they had the crowd in the palm of their hands. And talk about chemistry in a match and making it work. 5 stars. Perfection. And set the stage for everything to come.
Well, as you said, setting the stage for the new Hart Foundation, which included Bret reuniting with his brother Owen, brother-in-laws Davey Boy Smith and Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and of course, Brian Pillman. This incarnation of the Hart Foundation was clearly anti-American, while being popular within Canada and Europe. As the leader of this stable, Bret Hart routinely carried the Canadian flag to the ring and engaged in promos where he declared the superiority of Canada over United States. He became so despised by U.S. audiences that they would often throw debris during his ring entrances, interviews, and matches. Bret was actually voted as the most hated wrestler of the year in 1997. Wow, that's really crazy. Unique kind of deal here on Bret Hart, Groo. He's a tweener. He's loved in Canada and overseas, hated in the U.S., very unique for its time in wrestling, Groo. Thoughts on Bret Hart and the newest incarnation of the Hart Foundation?
For us, it was amazing. For him, it was like, this is where the whiny Bret Hart starts, because, and this is coming right from the book, he, even though he embraced that role to a T and he did it beautifully, he still resented the fact that people booed him. No, but and he's wrong. Well,
he's a heel character, though.
I know, no, but I'm saying what turned him into a heel. He still kind of carries resentment for that, at least according to the book, which is now like 7 or 8 years old. But he still couldn't understand why the crowd kind of turned on him. And, it wasn't that they turned on him, it's that they fell in love with this new guy. And that just happened. But to his credit, whether he liked it or not, he ran with it, and it was hot. It was an angle. It was an incredible angle, and it lasted a long time, and led to some incredible matches.
Well, let's talk about it right now. I believe we were there, Groo. SummerSlam, in which Bret Hart confronts the Undertaker. The Undertaker agrees to the match, and Bret wins his 5th and final WWF World Heavyweight Championship after spitting in guest referee Shawn Michaels' face. Michaels then swings a steel chair in retaliation, accidentally strikes the Undertaker, and there we go. Bret's got the belt again. After SummerSlam, Michaels is pushed as the top heel in the company, and here's where you start talking about some of the stuff you referenced in the book. Some of my research talked about that Bret clearly did not like the WWF's new Attitude Era, instead preferring traditional values. And this was sort of referenced as his character, as Hart would insult the U.S. fans because of the success of the Attitude Era.
Right. That's, that echoes what was in the book. Like, this wasn't the wrestling that he grew up on. This was entertainment. And, what?
Well, during Hart Foundation's feud with Shawn Michaels-led DX, as you said, Michaels, Triple H in China, DX frames the Hart Foundation in vandalizing the locker room of the African-American stable, the Nation of Domination, with racist motifs.
Oy.
In a retaliation during a promo with DX, Hart calls members Triple H and Shawn Michaels homos. Hart later apologized for his participation in the storyline, saying that he had been pressured into it, saying, "I am not in any shape or form a racist, and I don't believe it is anything to kid somebody about. I also want to apologize for any remarks I made about gay people. It was a stupid mistake on my part." So clearly, he's not comfortable with this real edgy sort of direction that the company's going.
Not at all. He's not comfortable with the evolution of the wrestling business, and that's probably going to be the cause of his. I don't want to say demise, because he never really had a demise, but his stock dropping, because he just could not get over it. And we're definitely going to be bringing that up when we talk about the screw job.
Here's the thing.
A couple hours from now.
No, we'll move into it, but I'm actually enjoying this. So you talk about stock dropping. Around this time, Bret Hart's on-air rivalry with Vince McMahon also escalated. Heated ringside altercation between the two led many fans to dislike McMahon, who at this point already had been exposed as the owner of the WWF more and more frequently on the air. Although Hart had signed that aforementioned 20-year contract back in '96, the WWF and Vince McMahon were in rough financial position by late '97 and felt like they could no longer honor his contract. Although Hart was arguably the biggest wrestler in the world during the mid-'90s, McMahon also felt that the value of his character was beginning to wane. Bret was encouraged by Vince to approach WCW about a contract, hopefully one similar to their original offer. Bret was reluctant at first to leave the WWF and wanted to renegotiate. Hart subsequently signs a 3-year contract with WCW. His final match with the WWF would be a title match against his real-life rival, Shawn Michaels, at Survivor Series in Montreal. All right, Groo, here's where it gets interesting. Hart did not want to end his WWF career with a loss to Michaels in his home country, particularly within the context of their nationality-fueled feud. He offered to lose, forfeit, or otherwise give over the belt to Michaels in any other way that McMahon wanted. McMahon agreed to Hart's idea of forfeiting the championship the next night on Raw is War, losing a few weeks later. Hart gave his word to Vince that he would not take the WWF World Heavyweight Championship with him to WCW TV. But, the research says that Vince was kind of paranoid about it, and this led to him breaking his word in what was eventually known as the Montreal Screwjob, even though Hart did not submit to the sharpshooter. Referee Earl Hebner, ding, 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 calls for the bell on McMahon's order. This resulted in Bret Hart losing the title to Michaels. The night ended with an irate Hart spitting in Vincent McMahon's face. The ironic images of him destroying television equipment, and of course, motioning WCW in the air in a WWE ring. He allegedly punches Vince McMahon backstage in front of Gerald Briscoe, Pat Patterson, and McMahon's son, Shane. Hart also confronts Shawn Michaels backstage about the match finish, and of course, Michaels feigns that he did not know anything about it. The WWE Groo has described the Montreal Screwjob as arguably the most controversial, most jarring moment in the annals of sports entertainment. Quite possibly the single most controversial finish in wrestling history. Yet it could be said that it was one that revitalized interest in the WWF and began the precipitous slide for Bret Hart. Many a pundit have written and talked about it. Groo, your take on the Montreal Screwjob?
I blame two people, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and here's why.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Here's why. Okay, the decisions that both of them made pretty much backed Vince McMahon into a corner. Because let's say that, the whole reason that Bret Hart refused to lose to Michaels had nothing to do with Montreal. It had everything to do with the fact that, if you remember from the Broken Skull thing, he said that that he had a meeting with Shawn like a month before or something, and he said, "Listen, I'll lay down for you. I'll do whatever they want us to do." And Shawn said back to him, "I'm not willing to do the same for you." So Bret was like, "Fuck this! I'm not losing to this guy in Montreal." He would have if Shawn didn't say that. Bret has said that. So that put Bret in the position to tell Vince, "No, I'm not going to drop it. So let's do it tomorrow night on Raw. I'll forfeit the title." And if I'm Vince, I'm like, forget him taking it to WCW and putting it in the trash. It's not about that. It's about, what does that do to the title? You beat Shawn Michaels, or you didn't lose it, so you're leaving the company. You're going to come on our show the next night, and you're going to forfeit it. So now whoever becomes a champion is a paper champion. That's the problem. And Bret just didn't. He didn't respect. I hate to say he didn't respect the business, because that's what he respects most. But in this instance, he should have seen the business point of view of it and why his plan could not happen. And he had to have seen this coming in some fashion. And he did. That's why he had the documentary there. He knew it was coming. He knew some shit was going to go down. So, and he knew why.
I've seen the documentary. I think that was put into place long before. A couple of things that they got burned, whether or not you agree, they got burned with Alundra Blaze, Medusa Michelli, whatever you want to call her. She drops the women's title in the garbage on WCW television. I believe that Vince did not want another fiasco. Not only was this an on-screen war, this was off-screen. This was when the wrestling websites were getting hot. I mean, everybody was angling for future information about Bret Hart. But here's the bottom line. And Bret is a wrestling purist, so the try and true practice of when one guy leaves the territory for another is you drop the title to whoever the promoter wants you to go, and then you move on to greener pastures. You got a big-time fat contract. This whole notion of dropping it in Canada, he was himself. He was the hottest free agent with all kinds of heat. He should have dropped it, cleanly. I mean, whether or not Shawn Michaels is a douche, it's kind of immaterial. I hear what you're saying, but he should have done the tried and true honor practice.
I agree.
Okay.
I said that. Yeah, I agree. He didn't respect the business enough in that situation. He had to know that how can you do that? You destroy the title that way. So he was taking it personal when it was just business. Now, Michaels shouldn't have said what he said. You can always think that, but you don't have to tell somebody to their face that you're going to fuck them over. You don't. You know that's stupid. But Michaels was an arrogant young punk at the time, and look, what happened. Vince had no choice. Like, he really had no choice there. Like, what was his choice?
Well,
what else could he have done?
Well, okay. There's always choices. However, I'll agree with a couple of things you said. Just handing over the title, while I agree there is a lot of credence to the paper champion thing, it's still wrestling. They probably would have worked around it. But what I think Vince did amazingly was he took a situation that could have been viewed as such a negative, and somehow he went on the offensive.
Oh.
I mean, if you read any of the books, there was borderline mutiny in the locker room. Mick Foley didn't want to come to work. The Undertaker, the locker room leader, was furious. Yet somehow Vince was able to take this as an opportunity. And to me, in my notes, when this happened, I could not wait to watch Raw the next night to see what they were going to say. I mean, it was just he was able to capitalize it, and in some semblance, this really ignited. I don't know about the Attitude Era, but it really, a lot of eyes were on the product the next night.
Yes, and it couldn't have worked out better in so many different ways. This was perfection, and Bret Hart knew that. Well, I don't know if he knew, but he was going down. He got a fat contract, but his career was going to hit a brick wall in WCW. And, I just think the whole thing, I'm glad it happened because we got some of the greatest wrestling, programming ever. But you hate to see relationships fizzle like the ones that did. But like I said, it was like what's the one time it happened before, okay? It worked. They remember when they took the title off of Hulk Hogan to Andre the Giant on that main event, and then he sold it to the $1 Million Man, and then Jack Tunney said you can't do that, so the title's now vacant, and that set up the tournament at WrestleMania 4, which Macho Man Randy Savage won. That's the kind of thing that worked then. It could not have worked during the time of weekly main event shows.
Well, I thought you were actually referencing the prior screw job, which is well known to be no joke. Wendy Richter and the Fabulous Moolah, and I'm not joking, Fabulous Moolah came into the ring as the Spider Lady.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Wore a mask, and Sunset, rolled her up, and they did a quick 3 count, and Wendy Richter was gone the next day. I mean, I think she had put in contract demands, and Vince or the team said enough's enough, and out and Z. You never heard from her again.
Yeah. So I do remember that. But yeah, the Montreal Screwjob. I've heard everybody's account of it, and it all points back to really Bret just don't cross the boss.
It's funny because Wendy Richter, it's referred to as the Melville Screwjob.
Well, was that at Walt Whitman High School in?
Yes. A taping of Superstars Jr.
Yeah. Main event: Coco Beware versus King Kong Bundy.
That's right. Let's talk about that fat WCW contract. Reported 3-year contract included a salary of $2.5 million a year, which was over $1 million a year increase from the WWF contract. He was given a light schedule and a measure of creative control over his television character. A day after the WWF Survivor Series pay-per-view, Eric Bischoff, while with the New World Order, announced that Hart was going to be coming to WCW and joining the NWO. Hart made his debut on Nitro on December 15th, 1997. He was also heavily involved in the month's Starrcade pay-per-view, due to a 60-day no-compete clause from the WWF. His first appearance was as a special guest referee for a match between Eric Bischoff and Larry Zbyszko.
Talk about running 90 miles an hour into a brick wall.
So Bret's first appearance with WCW is as a special guest referee.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because, Bret always talks about how WCW just didn't know what to do with him. But you said that he had a measure of creative control over his character. So wouldn't that make it partly his fault too?
Do you feel like he just was never into it?
Well, I know he was definitely scarred by the screw job. He definitely was like, he wasn't happy with the business, but he was getting a lot of money. So maybe he just decided, you know what, I'll do whatever the hell they want. Who gives a shit?
Well, let's get some final thoughts. Look, we don't need to break down the Hitman's WCW career, as it was generally known to be a massive failure. Bret Hart, the hottest free agent at the time, perhaps the hottest free agent in the history of professional wrestling, and it was by all accounts a bitter failure. Groo, final thoughts. What the hell happened to Bret Hart when he went to WCW?
Well, like he said himself, they did not know what to do with him. He was jumping into an already declining storyline. The NWO was hot for a while, like red hot, and then he came in just as they were kind of splitting off into NW Red, NWO Black, and like shit was falling apart. And maybe their idea was maybe he would sort of put the pieces back together, but it just wasn't to be. He was, not long after Bret Hart went to WCW, the ratings war shifted because WWF was on the rise. It really was. And, Hart, Bret, I don't know, he could have, you didn't mention it, but didn't McMahon offer him a lesser contract to stay? And he just...
No, from what I understand, he was the one that openly encouraged Bret. They couldn't afford Bret Hart. And I think it's even referenced, we see Vince talking to him in that Wrestling with Shadows documentary, he wanted Bret, and it could have all been a pre-planned strategy, so to speak, but I think they wanted to get under from that massive 20-year contract.
Well, maybe, but either way, look, I definitely feel for Bret Hart in some fashion because he kind of got pigeonholed into that situation with the contract. Who's not going to sign a 20-year contract for that kind of money? I mean, you're basically taken care of no matter what happens for most of the rest of your life. And then, Vince, I would have almost have rather have seen... what's his name, Bret Hart, sue him for breach of contract. But either way, it worked out poorly for everybody except the fans. The fans got what they wanted.
Is there any truth that you signed a 20-year contract with Charter Schools USA?
No, you think they want me hanging? They don't want me hanging around for 20 days rather than 20 years.
It's a joke, damn it! It's a joke.
But to answer your question, as far as WCW goes, again, they were not doing things long term. They were writing the show as it was airing. So it does not surprise me in the least that his first appearance would be a special guest referee in a match between Zbyszko and Bischoff. That's the best they could do with Bret the Hitman Hart. I'm surprised the Hitman didn't put the kibosh on that and say, no. But maybe he didn't care. It's possible.
Research has Bret Hart citing his steel plate segment with Goldberg and his tribute match for his brother Owen against Chris Benoit as his most two worthwhile moments while with the company. Bret Hart was said to be proud to have been WCW World Heavyweight Champion for a short period of time. After his WCW career and his wrestling career ends, for many years the public comments were few and far between for Bret and the WWE. Bret Hart had a stroke in 2002 and for a short time was in a wheelchair. Fans were always pining for a return to his wrestling home, the WWE, but it just felt like Groo would never happen. perhaps the addition of Paul Levesque, a.k.a. Triple H, to the corporate leadership structure helped. In mid-2005, Bret Hart works with the WWE for the first time since 1997, contributing hours of interview footage and selecting matches for his WWE home video release, Bret the Hitman Hart, the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. He returned to WWE programming as a guest on the November 16th episode of the web series Bite This. Now, I do remember the WWE home video release because Vince McMahon intros the DVD with personally thanking Bret Hart. There was still a lot of bad blood, but they were able to get Bret Hart into the studio. I don't think he worked. I think he meets Vince. I think they take a picture of them shaking hands. It looks uncomfortable and awkward, and Vince specifically references Bret and thanks him. I don't know. Let me throw it to you. Did you see the DVD? Because I know I did. I enjoyed it.
It's on my shelf.
Were you hopeful for a more major return at some point?
No, because I think after the stroke, that just wasn't going to happen. But wasn't the stroke? Was the stroke actually attributed to the Goldberg kick?
Listen, I definitely believe I've read stuff over the years. I don't want to say it was. I mean, clearly this is a guy who put his body on the line, and he was not. He finished up his career. He wasn't a healthy guy. I know he had a lot of health issues, and I think still does to this day.
Yeah. Well, we did get that match, but that street fight between him and Vince. That was fun.
Don't go ahead. Don't jump ahead.
I'm sorry. But when he came back, I was not expecting anything. It was great to see him, but I wasn't expecting anything.
But we're just talking about the DVD.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Read between the tea leaves. Follow the notes. Well, since Groo jumped ahead, April 1st, 2006, Bret Hart was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by one Stone Cold Steve Austin. Interestingly enough, he did not appear alongside his fellow inductees at WrestleMania 22 the following night. On June 11, 2007, Hart made his first appearance on Raw since October 27, 1997, when he appeared in a pre-taped interview segment voicing his opinion on Vince McMahon as part of the Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night. So Bret does the Hall of Fame, Groo, but does not appear at Mania the next night. His Hall of Fame speech was, I remember it being middle of the road. He definitely thanked the fans, let everybody know that he was okay physically and okay mentally, but you could still sense the lingering bitterness he had with the business and with the WWE. He looked old, to me, noticeably older, grayer, wrinkles. Just my thought as a big fan. Yet, I'm sure as like me, you were happy to see his WWE return. Any thoughts on Bret Hart and the Hall of Fame?
Well, same as you. You know, it was nice to see, but we knew that I remember us discussing this. We knew that he wasn't going to appear because he always said that he would never work for Vince McMahon again, and that would constitute, at the time, the WWE Hall of Fame was just a televised dinner. It wasn't the event, the arena event that it is today. So he was really just showing up to make a speech. He wasn't working with them. And obviously now it's different. For him to appear on WrestleMania, they're still selling pay-per-views. It's him selling the product, and we knew that he wasn't going to do that. So I remember talking about that with you at the time. And and I know that's why he did not show up at WrestleMania.
Did you see this as the first crack in the ice that maybe this could lead to some kind of further relationship?
I didn't even think about it. I figured he was done. You know, like great, he's in the Hall of Fame, and now we move on. I mean, I didn't even think about the possibility of him coming back because what would he do? You know, we were told he couldn't wrestle anymore. So what's he going to do? So I didn't.
Well, I'll tell you.
So the answer is I didn't even think about it.
Well, I'll tell you what he's going to do. I'll tell you what you want, what you really, really want. Bret Hart re-signs with the WWE in late 2009. On December 28th, after weeks of speculation surrounding Bret Hart and his presence in WWE, Chairman Vince McMahon announced that Bret Hart would be the special guest host on the January 4th Raw. As you may remember, Groo, the WWE is amping up their show as TNA, Total Nonstop Action, had brought in Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff in the fold and moved their Impact show against the WWE on Monday nights. So, hey, we got some decent competition. Let's bring in Bret the Hitman Hart. Show opens up with Bret thanking the fans for their continued support, jokingly teasing announcer Jerry Lawler about their long-running 1990s feud, and confronting Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon regarding the Montreal Screwjob at the Survivor Series in 1997. Both Hart and Michaels were able to agree on a truce, shaking hands and hugging. While many fans have casted doubt on the sincerity of their reconciliation, both men in later interviews have confirmed that it was indeed genuine and not part of the storyline. It also appeared that Vince and Bret had buried the hatchet later in the night. However, Vince McMahon, Mr. McMahon, subsequently kicks Bret in the cojones, which was in fact in part storyline. And Bret Hart and Vince McMahon had been on speaking terms since 2009. So, Groo, not only is Bret Hart back, but he's fully integrated into a storyline with Mr. McMahon. Perhaps maybe 5 or 10 years too late, but it is happening. Bret the Hitman Hart back on Raw and angling with Mr. McMahon.
Great. It was great stuff. I mean, just if only for all of us as fans to get that closure, you know, and it was fun to watch. It was fun to see him and Michaels face-to-face in the ring, and to see him and McMahon. Like, McMahon with that nut shot was, I mean, I think I jumped off the couch, and you know me, I don't get off that couch easily. But yeah, I mean, I was like, whoa! It was great. Great television. We knew it was short term. We knew it wasn't going to last, and it was perfect. Was the street fight at WrestleMania?
Yes, I was there live, actually, but let's go over it. Hart and McMahon reproduce events to those that occurred in the Montreal Screwjob. McMahon spits in Bret Hart's face, as Bret Hart did to Vince McMahon, and Hart destroying parts of the technical equipment that goes into producing Raw, as he did during the Survivor Series. We had some limousine job. John Cena gets involved, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, they have which I think was a good setup, the interview segment with Stone Cold Steve Austin, in which Bret, because of this limousine car injury, I think he had I think it was his arm was in a cast, or and it was staged. And then Hart, along with his family, then he beats up Vince, and then of course we have the match at WrestleMania. McMahon attempts to buy Hart's family into turning against him. However, they turned against Vince McMahon instead and help Hart defeat Mr. McMahon. All right, it was a huge schmoz, Groo. Hart versus McMahon. It was a lot of run-ins to hide the fact that Bret already had a stroke and was very limited due to insurance liabilities in terms of his physicality, while McMahon was probably around 60 to 62 years old at this point and was on his final legs in terms of physicality. It was not a good match, but it was fun and nostalgic to see these old guys tangle one last time. Supposedly, it was the end of the evil Mr. McMahon character, at least in the ring, and for all intent purposes, the end of Bret Hart in the ring. Groo, thoughts, my friend, on Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon years later at WrestleMania 26, I believe. Yes,
Loved it.
Go ahead.
Loved it. Great novelty, lots of fun, never boring. You're right, it wasn't a great wrestling match, but it didn't have to be. And just to see those two guys just beat the crap out of each other was great television for us. And like I said, it worked out beautifully for the fans. It was great. Don't you think so?
Yeah, it was good. It came off better on TV than live. I was actually really looking forward to it. I was there live.
Where was it?
Arizona. I wasn't living in Arizona, but I came and stayed with my dad.
Right, okay.
But I remember also Vince took a shit ton of chair shots, stiff ones. I mean, it was definitely a little bit of payback, I think, for maybe some years of frustration there. But it sort of wrapped up two major characters their incarnations, Bret the Hitman Hart and Mr. McMahon.
Yeah, and it did it very well. And, it was like, let's drink a toast and move on.
Well, since 2011, Groo, Bret Hart has had sporadic appearances in wrestling, mostly with the WWE. On the post-show on Raw, May 27, 2013, the Hitman was honored by the city of Calgary and the WWE with a Bret Hart Appreciation Night, a celebration of the work he had done in his career. Present in the ring for the celebration was Pat Patterson, yummy, Chris Jericho, Shawn Michaels, and Vince McMahon, who had all each paid tributes to Bret Hart. Bret has served as an expert on panels for WWE programming, including the March 25th, 2013 episode of Raw. He's been a special guest panelist on the NXT Arrival pre-shows. Bret Hart was in the corner of his niece Natalya on March 27, 2014, in an episode of NXT in which Natalya loses to Charlotte Flair, but then Bret and Natalya both put the Nature Boy and Charlotte in sharpshooters to finish out the night. On April 6, 2019, Bret Hart became a two-time WWE Hall of Famer when he was inducted as a member of the Hart Foundation along Jim the Anvil Neidhart. You may remember during Bret Hart's speech, an audience member charged into the ring and tackled Hart and his niece Natalya to the ground, but they were quickly saved by a multitude of wrestlers who literally beat the crap out of the guy.
Yeah.
After several minutes, Hart continued his speech. WWE later released a statement saying that the attacker was sent to the local authorities.
I think his name was Prawn Shikels.
August 2019, Hart appeared at the SummerSlam pay-per-view, wishing Seth Rollins good luck in his match against Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship. May 25th, 2019, Bret Hart made a surprise appearance for All Elite Wrestling's inaugural pay-per-view, Double or Nothing, to unveil the AEW World Championship. Didn't surprise me that Bret makes an appearance with the now WWE main competitor AEW. It just always seems like Bret has a little bit of lingering animosity towards the WWE.
Certainly does.
Fast forward March of 2020, Bret does an appearance on the WWE Network's Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin in a wide-ranging interview that, to me, really didn't break any new ground. Grew as a wrestling fan. If anything, Bret puts himself over while finding a new target for his invective, Bill Goldberg, now openly and defiantly criticizing his fellow WWE Hall of Famer for that stiff kick to the head, which supposedly ends Bret's career a bit prematurely. We've talked about this kick before, but when you hear Bret Hart today, there's still that bitterness towards fellow wrestlers, the WWE, and even pro wrestling as a whole. To me, Groo, it's a fascinating psychology. Life has indeed been very hard for Bret Hart. Final thoughts on Bret Hart today, Groo, and just where does he fit in the wrestling world? Was he indeed the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be?
No, but he was damn close, and he should be proud of that. He will be remembered as one of the greatest of all time, just not the greatest of all time. But I wish he would just, there were bumps in the road, but there's bumps on the road for everybody. You could blame this person, blame that person, but then I wish he would just take a look back at what he's accomplished. Nobody can take that away from him. Nobody can take it away. So he doesn't. He just like we saw him in person at the WrestleCon last year, or maybe it was the one 2 years ago where he was sitting at the table greeting fans, but he wasn't even greeting them. He was just sitting there like,
he looked miserable.
Yeah, look what you've done. You sold out arenas. You were the champion. You were the top dog. Most people would kill for a chance to be treated like that for 5 minutes, let alone years. So what are you so pissed about? Lighten up. Yes, I mean, look, he was already. One could say that, and we haven't talked about and we probably won't, but we haven't talked about the death of Owen Hart. But he probably, had some bitterness about that. But that aside, hey, shit happens as far as, in the wrestling business.
Hey, yeah, your brother dies in a
No, I didn't mean.
I
didn't mean that. I meant that aside. I meant that aside. You know, he doesn't. Dare I say, he doesn't even give himself enough credit. It's like, be proud of what you've done. Don't dwell on what you feel you could have done, because he did it all. What didn't he accomplish?
Well, as you went into a little bit of rambling territory, I think you got it on the head, though. I think he's not the best there is, but I agree. He's damn close, and he had many great moments in the ring and some not so great moments. But his career is a fascinating one. But I think for me, and probably for you, he's up there, but he's just not quite there.
That's right, and there's nothing wrong with that. And he's still a legend. He's still a 2-time Hall of Famer. He's still one of the greatest of all time. And when is he in? I don't think he was in either of our top 10 lists.
No, he was not for me.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't for me. But he's right on the edge of it. Like
he was an honorable mention, but I did not put him actually in my honorable mentions. I put him in there, but I had others who I felt could move up into the top 10, and he was not one of them, simply for the fact that his career is over.
Yeah, but I mean, look, you know, I had people like Roddy Piper, and I had people who were dead in my
understood,
on my list.
But I agree with you. I think that he's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer, but I don't put him in the top 10. Whether I call that upper echelon, that's to be debated. But I don't. He's not making my top 10.
Do you think
he's a fascinating?
Yeah, he certainly is fascinating. Do you think if he had lightened up a bit about the wrestling business and wasn't so visibly and vocally critical of it, would he be higher in the respect level that he gets? Do you know what I mean?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because we've talked about this. In all joking aside, we've talked about this, and I think the answer is, to some extent, yes. He had a very, very difficult time transitioning with the times, whereas a guy like Ric Flair was sort of able to seamlessly transition from your classic mat wrestling to Attitude Era. He could do hokey gimmicks. He could wrestle for an hour scientifically. Bret Hart really, and I think that drove him early on. He really believed in that Hitman character and sort of the sanctity of it. But I think as things began to change and he saw the business change, he could not really evolve. And his greatness was unquestioned, but he was unable to transition from the new generation to the Attitude Era.
And you know something? One of the biggest differences between him and his brother Owen is that Bret never seemed to enjoy living the character like a Ric Flair. You know, he just never seemed to enjoy it. He took it so seriously. Owen ate up being a heel, and he loved it, and you could tell how jazzed he was about it. But Bret always had this like holier than thou thing with him. And
just think about this, Groo. Think about this. In wrestling circles, I mean, it's known that he absolutely hates Hulk Hogan. I think he's cool with Ric Flair now, but they used to bash each other back and forth back in the day. Clearly, you know, Shawn Michaels and him were, now they may be cool after all these years. So, I think Rick looked at the top guys, and and sometimes we all fall for this. We say, "Why is it not me? Why is it not me?" And he had a lot of trouble with that.
Well, you just mentioned 3 people who he is constantly feuded with outside the ring. 3 people who were on both of our top 10 lists, and that speaks volumes right there. Maybe Bret Hart carries with him a certain level of jealousy. Why couldn't I get to their level? And even though he was right just a notch below, maybe it was his bitterness that kept him down. Could be.
I think Bret would say, I am at their level, but for whatever reason, the promotion, the company wanted to put their machinery behind these top guys, and I was always kept down.
Well, he certainly is a better wrestler than many of them. Maybe not.
Okay, but that doesn't always
right.
mean
Exactly. But to him, that's what it's all about, right? Or as he would say, that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, he considers himself like he might be the best technical wrestler ever. One could make an argument, maybe Shawn Michaels, but either way. But there's so much more to the business than just being great in the ring. Hey, Marie.
Hey, Marie.
She's like, oh my God, you losers are still at this.
Yeah, she's like, yeah, listen, I got to go pick up a pizza for dinner, Groo. But listen, no rush, Groo. But that's a wrap.
This has actually been our longest podcast ever.
Yeah, well, that's a wrap on the Hitman Bret Hart. Groo, next week, it's just too big for one night. Massive changes on the fly, but we will not be there live, of course, but we'll be watching on the network. It'll be our annual WrestleMania preview. Groo, it just doesn't feel the same this year.
You're right.
On a depressive note for our podcast next week.
Yeah.
What might we talk about? WrestleMania. It's going to be a weird one.
I just can't wait to see Michael Cole step into the ring and announce the attendance for the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, with a paid attendance of 13.
Have you seen their T-shirt? I wasn't there.
Yes, I wasn't there. I want that. I think it's a great T-shirt.
Maybe I'll order that.
I think it's a great T-shirt. Yeah, look.
Now, here's my question, Groo. If we will make it next year live.
Los Angeles.
It's supposed to be L.A. Is our streak still intact?
Yes.
Are we still going with
act
of God?
This is an act of God. Our streak is still intact.
Yeah.
Look, and there's no argument. There's no argument.
And I'm going to say this on a personal note, and I really mean this. I'm going to watch. We may have some, our quarantine may be over. I may have some of the nephews, but I'll be watching with not necessarily a tear in my eye, but I'll be sad because I would have hoped to have been there live with you. And, I was looking forward to seeing you and seeing my folks for a few days. But we're going to make the best of it, Marie and I, and we'll enjoy WrestleMania. But it'll be a bummer. It'll be a bummer.
But we'll get through it just like we're gonna get through this whole thing. And next year, you and I will be in Los Angeles for the festivities.
No dollar will be spared for next year.
Can we drive there from Phoenix?
We can drive from Phoenix. It's a long drive, but we can drive.
I don't know. I think it'd be kind of fun.
Marie, what's the how long? 6 hours.
All right, forget it. We're flying.
Yeah,
I thought it was like 45 minutes. Yeah, I was like,
until you come, we'll spend 2 days here in Phoenix, and then we'll hop on a plane. You'll stay in our house.
Yeah, I want another one of those breakfast skillets that we had at that place.
You want to go to Chompy's for a breakfast skillet?
Chompy's, that was it. Yes,
that was it. All right, a Jew at heart. Very good. Very good.
Well, this was great. Our longest one ever. But look, it was a big topic. Hey, take it easy, guys.
Oh yeah. Oh, what she was saying is she was looking forward to me being out of town so she could have girls' night out.
Girls' night out? Where the hell are you going?
Yeah, well, now we're going nowhere.
Yeah.
Now we're stuck here.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Groo, listen, this was a good one. I look forward to hearing it back live, hearing it back in a little bit, and take us out.
We are on our way out. The dulcet tones of Jefferson Starship is playing us out as we bid you farewell. Everybody out there, please take care of yourselves. Stay inside. Let's
what? Go ahead, give us your.
Well, we just gave them for free almost 3 hours of time for them to sit in their homes and not go out and get sick.
Well,
that's a gift. We just saved 4 lives.
You're like a Nobel laureate right now. Unbelievable.
Yes. Now I'm going to the club.
Okay, very good.
No, but everybody, please take care of yourselves. Let's get rid of this thing so Moody and I can go to WrestleMania next year. All right.
That's right.
Think about us.
Yes, screw you. Think about us, damn it.
Exactly. And with that, we got a 1, we got a 2, we got 3.
Whack, whack. Wash your hands.